Thank you for tuning in, Voice of Reason Boston. This morning we have our lovely special guest. Her name is Linda Champion, and she is running for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. And we would like to thank you, Linda, for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Thank you. Today we're just going to be getting to know who you are and why you're running for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. And I know it's a position that everyone is going after, but we have a lot of candidates that's running, and they all have different backgrounds and different things that they're bringing to the table. For our viewers and listeners today, can you tell us about your story, as they would say, her story?
That's right. It's her story. But what I would say first and foremost is that for me, for the people in the community that are being impacted right now by crime, poverty, trauma, the things that the children in areas like Warren Gardens or the Heath Street developments. Right. I feel like I'm the only candidate that has actually lived the reality that they are currently living.
Really?
And I'm the only candidate in this race that has overcome all of those obstacles to get to a point where I can be in front of you and your listeners asking for a vote to become the next Suffolk County District Attorney. So the most important message for me is that, especially for women of color and young women, oftentimes there's always this ceiling, and people always tell us when we can be promoted.
Right.
And my message is, that promotion and that elevation doesn't come from man. That comes from God, number one.
Exactly.
And number two, as a person, you don't have to look to the left or right of you to determine what obstacles you can overcome and how high you can soar.
Right.
That comes from your own internal guidance, your own spirit, and then you have to then be the captain of your own ship.
Well said. Well said. So you said you came from where most of the people in the community are from. So if you can tell us where you're from, where you were brought up, and anything that we need to know about you.
Yeah, so my mother is a Korean immigrant. Okay. She met my father during the Vietnam War. She came to the United States and she was the only person in her family that came to the United States. And to this day, she's the only person in her family who lives in the United States.
Wow.
She came with my sister, who was about 3 years old then. And I was born here. So right about the time that my mom came here, that I was subsequently born. But, the issue that I had with my mom is that one of the things she never did is she never taught us how to speak her language.
Wow.
And for someone who doesn't speak your language and you're trying to raise your children, it can create certain barriers. And so for me, I don't ever recall growing up and having conversations with my mom.
Right.
And I later learned that it's because when she came to America, people, when she would speak, would laugh at her because she had an accent. And it was important. I mean, what I've learned about now that I'm a mother, there is nothing you will not do to benefit and help your own child.
I agree.
And so, even if that means cutting them off from being able to communicate with you, and that's one of the decisions she made. But my mom came here with my father. They just weren't equipped emotionally, maturity-wise, to deal with all that they were going to endure in the 70s, biracial couple in Texas with these two biracial children. And my father suffered from the effects of the post-traumatic stress from the war.
Right.
And back then, you really didn't know what they were dealing with. I mean, one day he'd be fine and charismatic, and the next thing he would snap and be completely violent. You could be laughing and watching TV, and the next thing he would be putting cigarettes out on my sister's body. So, and I remember, when we had left Texas and we moved to Germany, and just like this vivid memory of, my father, just beating my sister and me hiding under a table. But my father, it was so sudden, right? So and he never did it. He never did it to me.
Right.
But he would lash out at my mom or at my sister.
Right. The mental effect.
The mental effect, and so that's how you know that there's something that's sort of not treated and not properly diagnosed. But eventually, my mom got out of that situation. But getting out of that situation didn't necessarily mean that our life was then normal.
Right.
And it was far from normal, because now it was really different, because now she was alone with these black children, right? Mm-hmm. And my mother's a Korean woman who at that time still spoke very little English,
right,
and had immersed herself in the Korean community.
And some people may frown upon that as well.
Yes, they not only frown upon it, but they felt like, my mom is a very beautiful woman, and they just felt like you should get rid of those kids, move on with your life. And at some point, when it got too hard to pay the rent, when it got too hard to put clothes on us, when it got too hard to feed us, and at a time when my older sister then had been molested by someone who was much older, and had gotten her pregnant when she was 13, my mom had hit her ceiling, and had said, you know what, maybe these people are right, this is just too much, and I need to move on with my life. And so she left. She left my sister in one place, left me somewhere else, with people she felt could really care for us. But what she didn't realize is that created another set of hardships for us. I remember, my sister being pregnant, and, the place we were living, we had to sleep on a wooden floor, and under the floor was nothing but the dirt from the house. I mean, this is on the Louisiana Bayou. Mm-hmm. And so, as a kid, you're growing up, and there are certain things that you think are special. So for me, like figs growing on a fig tree and crawfishing in the bayou, and these are things that, all felt normal to me. Sleeping on the floor, on a wooden floor, that felt normal to me. And then when that family said, well, we have our own kids, and you guys are getting bigger now, and we really can't take care of you, they put me on a bus to meet another family that I didn't know, which was my father's family. And, I was so happy to be there in Texas, going back to Texas, seeing my family, because the family before wasn't my family.
Right.
And so, and even though I appreciate what they did for me, most of what I did there was, feed and raise the pig, and clean the house, and wash clothes, and get up every morning and dust all the furniture, because remember, we were sleeping on a dirt floor, like a wood floor that had dirt underneath it, so the house was always dirty and dusty. Right. So it was very laborious, And then when I got to my grandmother's house, who I didn't know, at least I had a bed, and I felt rich,
Right, yeah.
But what I didn't know living with my grandmother is, my uncle lived with us, and he was, he was selling drugs. And he was, he would take us to the store while he would steal or shoplift. He was, an addict, a heroin addict. And so I got introduced to a whole other set of things.
Whole new surroundings.
That I really didn't know anything about until then. But my uncle was very much like my father in that he was very, very abusive, very, very violent. Constantly beating his wife, constantly breaking her ribs, constantly, bruising her face. And that was my existence for a very long time. Right. And it wasn't until my mom came back to the United States and moved to Massachusetts that she had made a decision that she wanted to reunite with her children. The problem, though, is by that time, I was 16, 17. I wasn't the same kid she left behind at 8 or 9.
Right.
So when I got here, that reunion with my mom didn't work out initially. And I found myself in Boston, homeless.
Right.
And just really trying to figure it all out. Working 2 jobs, going back to school, going to a night school, a charter school at night to finish my high school education. Going to a community college to do 2 years, then going and getting a job at Suffolk University. But for that job at Suffolk University, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford to go to college. Right. So things happened in my life that sort of navigated me. What I say is everything is God's plan, because my path and trajectory, the life that I've lived, there was
setting you up for excellence.
But on paper, it would set you up for failure.
Right.
It would set you up for failure. And so, and think about the fact that, you know, I have a sister who was a teen mother. She didn't just have one child as a teenager, she had two children as a teenager. Everything in our pathway, every obstacle that we faced and encountered set us up for failure. It, you know, dealing with poverty, if you don't know what it feels like to open a refrigerator and see nothing but one can of Coke, if you don't know what it feels like to not know if you can afford more than the 59-cent hamburger at McDonald's,
Right.
you know, living for that day, like in Texas on Friday nights where French fries were 15 cents, you know. So if you don't know like what poverty feels like, you cannot
You
live
cannot,
that
right.
experience through someone else. If you don't know what it feels like to live in a house with an attic, you cannot live that experience from someone else.
Or understand where someone else is coming from. This is definitely your story. And I can say what can't kill you only makes you stronger. You're definitely a strong woman, because not giving everyone, you know, your story, I don't believe that everyone would conquer to where you are now. You know what I mean? You were able to be an attorney, and now you're running for one of the highest seats in the Suffolk County.
Correct.
And you didn't allow what you went through stop you from what you wanted to do. And it's very important for our viewers and our listeners to know that whatever you're going through, whatever battles you're going through, you can always change it
Yes.
for the positive and make a
Yes.
change. And not only that, you can relate to the community that you want to serve. Now, if you were to be the next district attorney, you would know when a case comes in front of you how you would tackle that.
For me, I feel, having been raised by the streets of Boston, I understand those cases that require compassion, and those cases where I'm dealing with someone that is dangerous and has to be segregated from the community. One of the things that people hear me and they get this soundbite and they misunderstand is my relationship and my position to young people. My passion and what I've been doing all of my adult life in Boston is working to help those less fortunate. But I want to help people in a way that they can be self-sustaining. What I don't want to see is people coming into the community, reading books or watching things on TV, coming in and telling us what they're going to do to help us,
Right.
without asking us what is it that we need so that we can not only take care of ourselves, but sustain ourselves.
Exactly.
And so my issue is this, you know, I'm a very spiritual person. I believe that there are certain things you should speak over a person's life.
Right.
And the fact that the conversation and that the community would accept any conversation that says, we know you're going to jail, we just want to know how long you're going to stay there.
Right.
So let's talk about if we can get rid of minimum mandatory sentences. Let's talk about if we can reduce your jail time. That is not how you help us.
No.
How you help us is catching and getting our children early so that they understand that they have a pathway outside of the existence that they feel that they're currently in. And the only way to help them is to provide them with opportunities.
Yes.
While you're quick to come in and tell me how you're going to reduce a sentence, show me what you are doing for the children in our community to provide them with opportunities to go learn a musical instrument. Tell me what you're doing to, because if they can learn a musical instrument, they don't have to work at the mall.
No.
They can go join a band. They can go to the Boston Symphony Orchestra. They can ultimately get a scholarship. One of the things that separates children of color, particularly those who are musically gifted, is their inability to read music.
Right.
So they can phonetically hear it, they can pick up anything and play it, they can sing, but they can't actually read the notes.
Right.
So show me what you're doing that provides us with the ability to be self-supporting,
Right.
and for us to grow. So no one seems to take offense to the fact that people are positioning our children to ultimately go to jail, and then the conversation has not focused on why are our children killing each other?
Right.
How can we stop them from killing each other? What can I do as a person to help these young people realize the value of their
Okay.
life? And even if, right, so as a baby, my baby doesn't know not to stick their finger in the socket, but I know it's dangerous. I know.
Right.
So what can we do as a community to pull our kids back to say that's dangerous for you?
Mm-hmm.
Love each other, help each other, because understand this. When a black man dies in the streets of Boston, no one cares.
Right.
No one. And I don't need people to tell me that they care. It's evident by the fact that there are so many unsolved murders of black and brown men.
Yeah.
Unsolved. Do you honestly think that if we did the Louis D. Brown Peace March and we walked down Milnia Cass Boulevard and the faces that we saw were all young white women or young white men, that there would be 4 detectives assigned to a homicide cold case squad?
I believe it.
I don't think so. But in order for other people to value us in our lives,
Right.
we have to first value and help each other. So one of the things people say is, well, you sound so angry. Yes, I am angry.
Well, I wouldn't say angry. It's more passionate.
It's-
'Cause you see what's going on.
Yes.
And you're in the system where you see needs change. So I wouldn't say angry. I would say passionate.
I would say that I am passionate because I see, even if you don't see it,
Right.
and even if white America doesn't see it, when I look at a young black or brown man or woman, I see all the potential and all that they can be.
Yeah.
Because in the same way people look at them and they feel like, oh, they're hood, oh, they're losers, I don't want to waste my time, they have no potential. Those words were spoken over me in my life.
And look where you are now.
Exactly. And what it takes is it takes people to love them enough to help them out of the predicament that they're in.
Yeah.
And when we talk about crime and when we talk about punishment, when we talk about law and order as communities of color, we are not saying that our children get a pass. We've never said that. Our parents are the first to say, I will take you to the courthouse myself
Right. There's
if
a
you
lot
do
of
something
parents-
wrong.
Yep. There's a lot of parents that goes into court with their children.
Yes.
I see them.
And there are a lot of parents who will turn their children in if they know that they did something wrong.
And
right?
if they're going to get the support and they're not just going to lock them up.
Right. And the piece that people have to, what I want people to understand about me is that for those people who've ever worked with me or dealt with me, can I be firm? Yes. But am I fair? Absolutely. Do I understand the inequities that exist within our system and the racial biases and prejudice that exist towards us? Yes. And even as a woman of color, if I'm passionate, they say I'm angry. If I express my opinion, they say you're mad.
Right.
If you make a comment about something, they say you're jealous. Why can't you just voice your opinion and be heard?
Right.
Why, as a woman, do we always have to be marginalized and put in a box? But if a man exhibits those same confidences, they're strong.
Right.
They're a leader. They're powerful, right? So my position is this. I understand what our children in the community need.
Right.
I'm committed to advancing them as a community of color.
Right.
And I've worked in this community. So district attorney seat or no district attorney seat, my work continues.
Yes.
And I'm responsible in this community and have been for many years for managing the lives of hundreds of families. Hundreds of families. Everything from the immigration issues they're facing, to housing issues that they're facing, to homelessness, to building and figuring out how to get them money, to figuring out how to take my families from Section 8 to home ownership. The process of managing a human's life far outweighs anything I could ever do inside of a courtroom. Mm-hmm. Because if I can stabilize a family in this community and help them understand how to build their own economic wealth and successes, and provide them with the support and the resources they need to do the things they'd like to do, being an entrepreneur,
Right.
whether they want to go back to school, whether they want to buy investment property. If I can help them do that, then guess what we don't have to do? We don't have to keep begging people for jobs. We don't have to keep begging for opportunities. We don't have to keep wondering why we get passed over for promotions and other people can take and steal our ideas and get ahead, but we find ourselves in the same exact
spot.
position.
Yep.
We don't, as people of color, while some of the candidates of color have all these sponsors, the average person, me, we don't have those sponsors. We come from the community and we work for the community. And so I want to make sure that voters and listeners and people understand that if we want to change, if we truly want to change how people manage our lives,
Right.
we have to make sure that the seat cannot be sold to the highest bidder.
Right. That's true.
And everything you hear in this election, they say, oh, you can't raise this money or you need this money. No, I need voters.
Yes.
I need people who don't care anything about politics, but care everything about our own lives.
And your community.
And
the
our
changes
community.
in the community. Yes.
And to improving the quality of life for other people. Come out and vote on September 4th.
Yeah, it's true.
It's the only way we're going to change. And so what I always say on the campaign trail is you can continue to prosecute people, but if you keep prosecuting people and we don't deal with the real conditions that we're dealing with that cause the crimes, nothing changes.
Right.
And I don't care what line of crap all the other candidates give you. Nothing will change unless you know how to change the conditions that exist in the community. And you showing up once a week, you showing up for a 30-minute roundtable discussion, you joining a board has no impact on our children's lives. None.
Right.
And even if every cop goes to those schools and they know all those kids' names, if they don't know the names of the parents, it doesn't matter. If they don't know the hardship that the families are enduring, it doesn't matter. If you're arresting a child in school for acting out and you don't know he hasn't had a meal since yesterday at lunchtime, there's a problem.
There is.
And so what I want people to do is pay attention. It takes one life to change another life.
Yes.
And if we can focus on one life at a time, instead of making people statistics and talking about these grandiose ideas, which you and I both know they can never achieve. Not overnight.
Not overnight. It's a long process.
I'm one person, but the community is not one.
No.
And if I can get the community to help me, then we can work towards crime prevention. We can make victims and witnesses feel safe. We can create opportunities for women who are suffering, whether it's from domestic violence or through date rape or through other forms of
Mental
abuse
health,
that they
yep.
suffer. We can get them to come forward knowing that they will, one, find someone who truly cares for them.
And it's also about resources too. We have I've always said this. We have resources, but we don't. People hear them, but they don't. It's about reinforcing the resources that we have available for people and what we're going to do on the next step to continue to help them move forward with their lives. And that, not only that, it helps them from not getting back to where they were.
Correct. And for example, I hear people all the time saying, I can't get oil in my tank for heat. I'm having problems with my rent. But there are programs that exist in the community that will give you up to $4,000 annually. And if you're facing homelessness, if you're facing eviction, if you can't get your lights on, there are programs that exist. People just need to know how to get to those programs before the landlord gets to the court to file the eviction. There are ways we can help people. And sometimes it's like, but you got to first know that they need it.
Right.
And they have to know how to find you. But it's not for them to come out knocking on our door. We have to be proactive, going out and saying, do you need help? Do you need this? And so one of the
things that are available. Yeah.
So one of the things I would like to do, having been a prosecutor, understanding what my workload looked like, understanding the challenges that I had, if you want to bring diversity into the office of the district attorney, you have to increase the living wage, because the reality is this: for people of color, we don't have families that have the financial backing to support us through working in companies or places that pay us a low salary. We don't have that support.
I agree with you 100%.
Our parents are kind of trying to pay their own bills, but why does the office look white? Because their parents can afford to help them through that experience.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I was working for the district attorney's office. It's a good place to work. You learn a lot. You learn about your community, things that you didn't really know before. It really opens a lot of doors for you to help people that are impacted by crime. However, I was facing in a position, I really wanted to stay there to make it a career, but the salary was so low.
Exactly.
And I had a master's degree.
Right.
And I'm like,
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. I have a child, I have a mortgage. And my husband would tell me, Tamisha, what are you doing to yourself? I said, leave me alone. I'm taking all the experience that I get, that I can.
But I need to, in order to attract people like you, I have to get the victim witness advocate salaries up as close to $65,000 a year as possible. And I got to get those entry-level lawyers' salaries up to at least $75,000 as possible. As you know, the victim witness advocate and that prosecutor work hand in hand. And that relationship is very important.
You build a real strong relationship
Yes.
in order to make the case
Yes.
move forward and to make a strong case to help the person who is impacted by the crime, because it's a lot of work. You're working with a lot of people. You're working with the police officers, and it could be a hard situation at the end of the day. Sometimes you can go home late, and then you're looking at your paycheck, and you're like,
Right.
what's going on?
But not only that, that's if you go home, because as you know, most of the people going to a second job after they punch out. And so I have to make it so that there's a quality of life that exists for the people that are called on to serve the public and our community, and make sure that they are fresh each day when they come there, so that they're not exhausted, so that they're not tired, so that they're not worried about how they're going to pay their rent that month. Because if my prosecutors are dealing with those same issues that the people in my community are dealing with, it's problematic, because
Right.
nobody can focus on the task at hand. I need the prosecutors and the advocates to focus on the victims and the witnesses. I need to get the victims in a place where I can transition them from no longer feeling like a victim, but feeling more like a survivor.
Right.
And in order to do that, I have to be able to give them the wraparound services that they need. And the first line of defense is that advocate and that prosecutor. The other thing is I have to get them vested in the community. I got to get it to the point where they care about the community that they are prosecuting in. And the only way to do that is to get them back into the community. You can't just show up in our community to prosecute people and go home the next day. You or the same day, right? But you have to be able to come in
Understand.
and know the community that you're serving. So when you see people in court, you know their life experience. You know what's happening. If someone comes in and they're telling you a story about a particular area, you know whether or not that makes sense to you. You understand the struggles that those children are facing.
Or you understand why this occurred
Yes.
and why this is going
Yes.
on, and you'll be able to put some type of, some type of condition in place to help this person get back to where they need to be. Because oftentimes you hear this, and I cannot count on my fingers how many times I've heard people say, or I hear victims say, "You don't understand where I'm coming from. You don't know where I live." Or you can't relate, and then they don't move forward with the case.
But you can say, but if they can see you as someone that they know to be a friend, they can see you as someone that they know cares about them and the community, that we are there as servants to them. They don't serve us, we serve them.
Right.
And if we can show them that they can trust our judgment, and we can start to treat people in the community as human beings and not as a file, then I think we can start the road to change. I mean, until we can do that, until we can have it so that a black man walks into a courtroom and is not seen as a danger, but as a friend, we are going to be facing the same conditions that
Right.
we have now, which is mass incarceration, which is, prejudice and racism. The prosecutors have to understand that you should not be prosecuting children in Suffolk County if they block the road off to play ball. If you're not prosecuting the kids in Wellesley who are blocking the road off to play street hockey. So how can one community treat it one way and our community treat it differently? The community also has to be a little more tolerant of what it feels like to be a child or to be a young teenager growing up in an area that's very dense. And so I hear residents say, the kids are making noise when they come out of school, or they're too loud when they're getting on the bus. And so, we just have to be a little more tolerant. Like, they're going to be loud.
Right.
They're gonna be rambunctious. They're gonna have fun and run
They've been
and
sitting in a chair
Yes.
for 8 hours my son, when he comes from school, he's all over the place, but it's okay.
right.
I expect that from him because he's been standing still, listening to the teacher talk over and over, and I get that. But us as a community, we need to understand that we have several people running for candidacy, for the district attorney's office, and they need to know who's running and why are they running,
Right.
and get to know your story. I've never met you, but you have a story that almost made me cry, and it's really important for people to know you and to know what you're doing in the community. People also should know that you were an assistant district attorney,
Yes.
as well. So that's why you know certain things that most other people may not know.
And then it's just communicating that I was an assistant district attorney. I have prosecuted cases. I know some of the other candidates in the race haven't tried cases, have never actually worked on criminal cases. So theoretically, when you read stuff or you see stuff played out on the media, it's easy to say, oh yeah, if I'm in office, that's not going to happen. If I'm prosecuting, this is how it's going to be. But until you've been in my position of balancing out the life of a victim and trying to figure out what is best to do for our community, understanding that you have another life in the balance, which is the defendant, my job is to be fair and to be just. My job also is to figure out what happened and to not rely on what a police officer gives me. My job is to be the fact finder of the truth. And I am not judge and jury. There's a judge and there's a jury. My only job is to present the evidence that I can prove to the jury, and then they
It's
make a
up to them.
decision.
Right.
The other thing that constantly comes up is whether or not I believe in cash bail, no cash bail. We can't take one system and then replace it for another unknown system. We've tried that historically over the years, right? Whether it's in the area of education, separate but equal. It was separate, but was it really equal? No, it wasn't. So I'm unwilling right now to take one bad system and replace it with another potentially bad system. What I think we should do is focus on the law of the Commonwealth. And in the Commonwealth, unlike other states, and so remember, everybody keeps trying to bring in all this stuff from other parts of the country into Massachusetts.
Right.
But that isn't
Realistic.
That's not realistic because it's not the law of our land. Our law in Massachusetts says that a judge is required to take into consideration the financial position of the defendant at the time of setting bail. And what I would ask of all of the prosecutors in the office, follow the law. The law says that you have to look to the financial abilities of that defendant and follow the law. And then there are other things that people may or may not understand. And you, having worked in the office, can maybe, elaborate on it, or you certainly understand it. But when we look at whether or not we're going to hold or detain someone, we're looking at a number of factors. And it's not about your age, right? And it's not about anything other than what is the crime that was committed. So what is the nature of the offense? And who is the person in front of me? And the person in front of me could be a flight risk. The person in front of me could have a history of violence against a person and also have a history of never showing up to court until we get them another time.
Right.
And oftentimes, the time we catch them is at a point in time when they've now hurt someone else.
Right.
And so what I would ask of the community, particularly people who are very passionate about eliminating a cash bail system, see, because remember, the people who are there who say that they will eliminate cash bail have never prosecuted a criminal case. And they have never dealt with a live victim who has been hurt and whose life is forever changed. So when they say that, I would say activists, advocates, whether you're for or against, you gotta go sit in sessions and you have to learn
public.
enough. Yes,
It's
it's open, it's public. Go sit in the session and really sit and on your own spreadsheet, say, after hearing the case, after seeing everything before you, what would you do? What would you do? Would you give cash or no cash? Some people do need cash bails, and who are those people? Those are people who do have a history of not appearing in court, who don't want to be detained. You got to give people a mechanism if they show a pattern of not being able to be responsible for their cases and for coming back and answering to charges. You still got to give people a way, even with a terrible history, to get out of jail.
Right.
And to not be detained unnecessarily. But following the law, what can they afford? How much can they afford?
Or you can put conditions in place.
Or put conditions of release in place. But, my thing about conditions of release is I always want to make sure conditions of release are reasonable and that you're not setting a person up for failure. Because oftentimes what I used to see and how I felt about conditions of release is some were so unnecessarily harsh that the person can't comply. Case in point, substance abuse user. Come back for testing once a week, drug-free. Now, is that realistic? No. And so you knew that they were going to come back in a week later and test dirty, and guess what was going to happen? Bail would be revoked, and they were going to be detained. So if we're going to do this and we're going to do it right, then we have to take a more humanized approach. We have to have an individualized plan for each person that's coming before us, and we can't be looking to standard guidelines. It's based on the person, the facts and circumstances, the best thing to do for the individual, the best thing to do for the community.
And then to help them not to reoffend
Yes.
and go back into the community.
Yes.
As an assistant district attorney, when you were working at the time, what were some of the things that you disagreed with or you came across when prosecuting cases?
So one of the, I remember vividly getting in trouble one time in Dorchester District Court because a case had come in that I didn't agree with, and what the case was that there was a young man who was found on a set of stairs, and he had a knife wound, a puncture, and there was a fight that had occurred prior to that. And they wanted to hold the individual storekeeper that they felt was responsible on this high cash bail. But the young man was from Stoughton. He was a college student. He was really in the store that day only to watch the store while his uncle went to get treatment. But there were these things where everybody gets nervous when there's a stabbing or a shooting, and so everyone wants to err on the side of caution and throw common sense to the wind, right? And so they said, I remember my supervisor saying to me, you're going to hold him on a $10,000 cash bail. And I'm like, this is a young man who's only in Dorchester that day to cover a store because his uncle had gone to some doctor's appointment. People came into the store for whatever reason, but something occurs and there's a fight and someone now starts running, and that individual who was running fell and that knife punctured that individual.
Wow.
But so I didn't feel comfortable asking for a cash bail on a young man who I didn't feel like stabbed anybody. I mean, I understand that there were the facts and things were happening, and I ultimately have someone in the hospital, but I wasn't convinced as an assistant district attorney that the individual that they had arrested and that was before the court was the actual person who caused the injury. And so you still got to convince me.
Right.
And I'm not going to go and detain someone or hold someone on some outrageous bail amount when the facts don't support it. And so I remember not doing as I was instructed to do. And getting into a lot of trouble. But at the end of the day, I want my prosecutors to understand that while we work for an office, we still have a duty to our own bar license to seek the truth and to uphold justice. That is our job. Mm-hmm. Our job isn't to take marching orders. And it is our job as lawyers to be independent thinkers, to do what is right at all times. And if I'm telling you to do something wrong, which I felt my supervisor at the time was telling me to do something wrong that wasn't right, that I do not just be a foot soldier and do what they tell me to do. Because that's not how you are to practice law. Not in the district attorney's office, not in the sacred position that we hold to protect, serve the public, and to make sure that we are abiding by the law at all times. Mm-hmm. And abiding by the law also means never, ever, ever violating the rights of the defendant. It's part of the job. So, you don't have to go and be best friends with them, but right. You certainly can't violate their rights. And if you find that their rights are being violated, then you have a duty to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Now, is there a way to help the defendant and the victim at the same time to come to a common ground of like a resolution when it comes to a case?
So that depends. It depends on the victim. Mm-hmm. So think about a situation like the case we saw in Stoughton, where you had 5 young men in the car. Something happens, 1 survives, 4 now have died. Let's say hypothetically that the person who survived was the driver and he had been drinking, and then that was negligent operation of a motor vehicle resulting in death. Mm-hmm. If the district attorney looked at that case and found it so egregious that they wanted to file charges against the survivor, and the victims, the mothers of the victims came forward and said, that's not what we want. They were friends. They were best friends. They would never hurt each other. Then as the district attorney, I feel that I should heed to what my victims, the survivors, the parents are asking. Because you can hurt them all over again mm-hmm. if you start doing things that they too don't want. And so that's where sort of bringing the victim and the defendants together works. But it has to be because the victim is asking and the district attorney believes that that's the right thing to do. Right. Not in every instance. I mean, I remember one of the harder cases I had to do was prosecuting a young man who had beaten his girlfriend. And the first time he beat her so bad she miscarried a child. The second time he beat her because he felt that she was doing something that she really wasn't doing. And right. and she was like very fragile, very petite, and very scared. And each time she would come, she would say that she didn't want to testify, didn't want to prosecute him. But then she had moved on with her life, and she had gotten pregnant again by someone else. And now this same ex-boyfriend was now coming after her, mm-hmm. abusing her. To not risk losing the life of another child, I went forward with that case without the victim's consent. Right. So and those are judgment calls, and I have to live and die by those judgment calls, right? Mm-hmm. And I have to answer to the community on them.
Okay, thank you, Linda, so much. I'm very inspired. To all our listeners and our viewers who are tuning in, please vote September 4th. We have a lot of candidates that are running. Go out and look at each and every one of them and see who it is that you want to run to be the assistant district attorneys, the Suffolk County District Attorney for your community. It's very important. If you're 18 or older, go out and vote. Not voting is like not doing anything for your community. Whether you want to or not, force yourself, spread the word, go and vote. Linda, can you please tell us any upcoming event? I know you have an event tonight.
So I have a ladies' night event. Any of the young ladies in the community or seniors in the community who want to come out, 51 Heath Street in Jamaica Plain. We're starting that at 6 o'clock. It's just to have a discussion so we can all get to know each other and we can talk about some of the things like, what do we need? What
Right.
do we want? What are we looking for? But most importantly, I need to figure out, how can we get our children to stop killing each other? How?
Yeah.
What is it going to take for us to get our children to stop killing each other? I would ask that everyone read my story at, go to champion4da.com, read my story, and I feel like if you have any questions for me, let me know what those questions are, and I'm willing to go wherever I need to go to have a discussion with
spread the
anyone
word. Yes.
about my views and why I have them. But my views are just my views. But at the end of the day, I answer to the community. And any decisions I make have to be what's right for the community and in line with what the community is looking for. So, and I'm open to that. I mean, this is a community that I love. It's a community that has gotten me to where I am and that has given me a tremendous amount of support over the years.
Thank you, Linda, once again. Get to know her story. She is on Facebook as well. And check out her website, Champion for DA. And thank you for all my listeners and viewers who are tuning in today. Thank you.
Thank you.